Hi, everyone. Happy Earth Day. Welcome to Food Talk Live. I'm your host, Danielle Nierenberg. This week, we've had a really great time celebrating Earth Day by having discussions with chefs and experts from around the world to talk about the importance of culturally appropriate diets that are good for people and the planet, and really work to respect the knowledge of farmers, cooks, and communities. Discussions have been building on the recently released One Health approach to food, the double pyramid connecting food, culture, and health, and climate from the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition. And Food Tank has been very honored to partner and collaborate with the Barilla Center on these issues. We hope you'll use the hashtag double pyramid and look for previous discussions about the double pyramid on foodtank.com. The U.S. Center for Food and Nutrition's health and climate pyramids are working to appreciate and honor the richness of culinary and dietary traditions and diversity across the globe. And they've created 7 cultural pyramids that focus on different regions of the world, highlighting the incredible diversity of what sustainable and healthy diets can look like. And that there's no one diet that really fits all. There's a lot of diversity that needs to happen to make diets that are good, again, for people and the planet. Yesterday, we had the honor of speaking to experts from the Nordic and Mediterranean regions. And today we're talking to experts from West and Southern Africa. And I'm really pleased to introduce our panelists. First, we have Ozoz Sokoh, who's also known as the kitchen butterfly. She's a Nigerian food explorer, culinary anthropologist, and food historian who is passionate about food in its entirety: cooking, eating, dreaming, researching, writing, photographing, and styling it on her blog, Kitchen Butterfly. A traveler by plate, as she refers to herself. She uses foodways, the social, cultural, and economic practices relating to the production of and consumption of food to explore the world. She says that food is more than eating. And then we have Mahlomola Thamae, who is the executive chef of TM Innovations, a catering business located in Johannesburg, South Africa. He is also a member of Chefs with Compassion, an organization that rescues food and provides meals to those in need. He helps to feed and nourish underserved groups throughout South Africa. He has more than 2 decades of experience as a chef in the United States, England, and of course, South Africa. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. I'm wondering if we can start off by just having you both talk a little bit more about yourselves and the work that you do. Ozoz, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Danielle. So I started off life as a geologist, and I've brought that into the space of food. Over the last 12, 13 years, I have taken on the work of documenting Nigerian and West African cuisine, because there's a lot of history and knowledge that is relevant, not just for historical value, but also for contemporary value, and just bringing all of that together in a place where people can access that knowledge and apply it is my life's work. And that covers eating, food as identity, but also sustainable approaches to cuisines and food traditions that are often not recognized as having West African lineage, but that are fundamental if we want to create a healthy, sustainable planet. So that's a little bit about me and my work.
That's Thanks. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Mahlomola?
Hi, guys. My name is Mahlomola Thamae, all the way from South Africa. I'm a chef. I'm a skill developer, whereby I talk to students about food and the importance of eating good, healthy food. And through COVID, we've learned different ways of doing things, and we had to adjust in terms of, for example, as a chef, I never know that I'll end up doing a food delivery service, of which it works very well for us. And then also checking on sustainability products, supporting local ingredients, supporting local farmers. And the other thing is that being a firm of a big collaboration, collaborating with other people in the industry, whereby we work together. And as I've said, I did a lot of work through COVID, working with Chef with Compassion, whereby I turned my kitchen into a soup kitchen. Through COVID, I served almost 6,000 meals out of my kitchen, and it works very well. So it's all about having sustainability and very safe and healthy food. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing to keep so many people fed during this critical time. It's really inspiring work. I'm wondering if we can bring up the cultural and climate, the health and climate pyramids for Sub-Saharan Africa. So the double pyramid really shows how our personal health and the health of the planet and our impact on the climate crisis are inextricably linked. And Africa, you know, is obviously a very diverse continent with many different kinds of cuisines, but there are similarities between, I think, West and Southern Africa in terms of the types of foods that are grown and how people relate to them culturally. I'm wondering, Ozoz, if you can talk a little bit about how you work to create awareness around the climate impacts of our food production and consumption choices.
My approach to food is really from farm to table. And part of that is a reclamation of heritage crops. The damage that colonialism has done is to push monocultures and to push crops that are not indigenous. And so part of my work is in sharing indigenous crops like fonio, acha, that is a low water crop, right? It can grow in really dry conditions. It grows quickly, but is incredibly nutritious. It's a whole grain, it's small, but it has critical amino acids that are not typically found in plants. And so sharing not just the importance of crops like that, but in creating a variety of uses for people, showing how you can use it in sweet and savory applications, supporting local producers of it, showing techniques to farm it and harvest it, just gathering a lot of information and putting it together in one place where people can access it. That is one way that I work to create awareness of heritage ingredients and crops.
Fantastic. Those crops are I think the foods of the future in so many ways because they are so resilient, they are so nutritious and nutrient dense. Chef, I'm wondering if you can talk about your approach to sustainability. You mentioned, really focusing on local farmers and working to support them. And again, that's been very critical during the pandemic. How do you create awareness among your clients about what those farmers are doing?
Thank you very much for that. We have learned, as I've talked about, collaboration with farmers. And apparently in my country, in South Africa, we need to develop and maybe from the government upwards to make sure that we have a system where we create, we make sure that we've got local food banks, whereby people go there and get food in terms of Chef with Compassion did a wonderful work in terms of doing that. They went to the market and take those food that were supposed not to be used, and we end up using that food and creating good sustainable food. And the other thing is that, example, you go to household helpers, which is cooks, whereby we teach them the basic of cooking and we teach them the sustainability of how to get fresh produce using the market. The other thing is that there's only a few markets, for instance, where I stay in Soweto, Johannesburg, Soweto, you'll find only a few markets, but when you go outside, whereby there's a lot of full markets whereby people plant in their own farms and everything. So we need to create an awareness of what is the importance of planting. For instance, in my garden, in my house, you can go at the moment, there's spinach, there's herbs, fresh herbs and everything. So people need to learn to plant and have fresh organic ingredients from their garden. So which means from your garden to the pot, from the pot to the client or customer. So it's all about collaboration in that regard. So talking to people, talking to the media. Example, I'm in a school here, Johannesburg School of Culinary Arts and Pastry, talking to the student and explaining to them what is the importance of eating good, sustainable food and food that heals. There's a lot of food out of our gardens, fresh food that's good for our health, vitamin C, iron, and everything. So we need very good food in that.
I'm so glad you brought up that healing aspect, because I've read that you've said that food offers a real chance for holistic healing. And if you can describe that a little bit more. I mean, you're talking about these connections between, educating consumers and culinary students and connecting them with farmers. But what is that holistic healing really all about?
Holistic healing is example, eating good food that's there's got a lot of example, vitamin C. We all need vitamin C through COVID, and eating a lot of, taking fresh food like fresh lemons, getting things like fresh okra, getting spinach, which is iron, getting a lot of herbs that in our gardens, and making sure out of those things, garlic, ginger, putting all those things, and we're eating those things, and there's no preservatives out of them. It's food from the gardens and straight to our pots, and we cook. The example, when you have lemon or a simple thing like a onion, there's a lot of vitamin C and antioxidant out of that. So you take those things, you cook them, and you eat them, and end up feeling healthy out of them.
Absolutely. It's really food is medicine. It's a very simple concept, but so
yes.
complex. Ozoz, do you want to comment? Go ahead.
There's a saying that say you are what you eat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ozoz, there's so much in West African cuisine that uses that idea of food as medicine and making sure that, instead of going to the pharmacy, you're starting with a healthy diet. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
I think I grew up knowing that certain things were nutrient dense or had certain properties. So one thing that fascinates me is how seasonal produce really supports health. So in December in Nigeria, when it's dry season or harmattan and it's cold and it's kind of like the flu season in North America, you have fruits that are high in vitamin C, star apple, you have citruses in season, you have a fruit called iyeye. And the understanding that the earth itself is in balance with humanity, having these things in season at a time when they're most needed is critical. And some of my work is really, how do we extend the uses of these things? How do we preserve? So how do we take fruits that are nutrient dense, rich in vitamin C? There's an African star apple that is a very popular fruit in this December period. And typically we eat it out of hand, but there's a lot of nutrients in the skins. And so how do we turn these into teas? How do we extend the use?
Sure.
That's one way for me of addressing sustainability. Instead of discarding them, we can compost, we can create new use cases, and just end up with a richer sense of the possibilities with these ingredients. So that approach is, yeah. And just like Mahlomola said about spinach, in Nigeria, I grew up knowing that, if you were iron deficient or slightly anemic, you could blend greens or juice them for health. So these are things that we grew up knowing almost as cultural knowledge without, you just get passed down. So there is a lot that we can tease out from historical cultural exchanges, but also looking at new approaches.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chef, do you want to comment?
Yeah, it's good as well. The other thing that is also good is also supporting local vendors, vendors on the streets. where they sell produce, you go straight to them as well. You support them, putting a meal in front of their table, but we as chefs to go to support them. So we'll also encourage them to get very good quality food, because when I go to buy, I make sure that I buy quality products. I don't want always A grade. So when it also support, there's a relationship between us and vendors in the markets, in the streets. We're supporting them. At the end of the day, we're also creating jobs for them and for their families. And then we're also creating that, guys, I've supported this such a vendor and they're selling good quality food. So it's all about selling good quality food for, and the other thing is that we all know that most of the food have got preservatives. So it's all about making sure that we go to markets whereby we know they plant natural, they use natural method of planting and doing things without putting any preservative, of which lately it's not easy to find them, but there are companies and farmers that are willing to learn and do things separately, differently.
Absolutely. And I love that, Chef, you're talking about these connections, really connecting with local producers, encouraging them to grow in different ways, supporting those local vendors who are so critical to this, and supporting local economies. I think, that's something that often gets lost in this discussion when we're talking about food. It is about supporting local economies. Ozoz, you talked about this idea of a richer sense of possibility of using and extending ingredients. And, food waste is an issue that we at Food Tank talk a lot about. Today is Earth Day. If food waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. I'm wondering how you both sort of encourage awareness around preventing food loss and food waste.
So at the start of the pandemic, a friend and I came together to host weekly Instagram lives where for an hour we focused on a single ingredient. And we did this over 17 or 18 weeks. Each week we would take an ingredient, onions, and we would talk about everything. My friend Ozoz of Ozoz Food Labs is the gardening queen, an urban gardening queen, and she advocates for people growing at least one thing. And we would do everything from talking about how to use onion skins in the garden to using a whole onion. And the approaches that we advocate are wholly sustainable. Use as much of the ingredient as possible. So take pineapples, for instance. Pineapple skins that are frequently tossed make an amazing tea. It can be fermented to make pineapple vinegar or a Mexican drink called tepache. Mm-hmm. You can use the core, and you can plant the head. And that's the kind of approach that really governs and guides my cooking. It's how can I waste as little as possible when I get into the kitchen and work with an ingredient? Whether that's tomatoes and I want to make a smooth pasta sauce and I have lots of tomato skins, which I then dry and convert to tomato skin powders and use that as a spice blend. We have to bring that approach of wholesomeness to selecting ingredients, but also to processing them. And so I feel like there needs to be a lot more education around sustainable approaches to cooking on an ingredient level. Sure. How do we use all parts of this ingredient, and how do we compost and things like that?
Absolutely. And Chef, I'm sure preventing food waste is an important part of your work. Any chef I've ever met does not want to waste food.
No, that's very important. As you just said, very profound. When you talk about things like potato skin, you can create nice chips out of potato skins. You don't throw them away. And then, as you know, in the kitchen, there's normally a pot of stock whereby all the veggies use them. The other thing is to preserve the vegetables. Use them and preserve them and then cook them nicely and make with vinegar, add some and pickle them, and that to save the food. Pickle the food, pickle the vegetables, pickle all the fruits and put in your fridge. Example, you can go to my fridge at the moment, you will find pickled onion whereby I pickle it myself. So you have preserved it to stay long than putting it outside. You pickle it and it stays long, and then there won't be food wastage. For example, Chef with Compassion, what they do normally, they go to the market and they take all those food that the market doesn't need. and they bring them to the kitchen, and we cook those things. Someone will say this food is supposed to go to the bin. No, and then you'll be shocked. Out of those food, what we create. Being a chef, you put extra ingredients and everything, and end up putting a biryani, putting some drinks and everything, and then some healthy drinks. You choose all those foods, you pickle them, you put them in fridge, and they stay long. They're preserved.
Absolutely. So creative and so important, especially during the pandemic, to make sure that food is not wasted, that it gets to people who need it the most. Ozoz, Chef Thamae mentioned pickling, and I'm wondering if you can talk about the health benefits of preserving foods through pickling and fermenting.
So, I mean, that brought me a lot of joy because pickling isn't something that's traditional in Nigerian and West African cuisine, but it was something that I relied on heavily throughout the pandemic. One, to combat food waste, but also because the process of fermentation and pickling really unlocks, in many cases, nutrients that might not be bioavailable. And fermentation is very common in Nigerian and in West African cuisine. And, take corn. There's a fermented corn starch, which we call pap in Nigeria. It's different from the South African pap. But what it does, when you compare using techniques like nixtamalization, which is used in kind of converting corn in Latin America to a paste, when you compare that with fermenting corn, as it's done in Nigeria and West Africa, by soaking in water for 3 days, you find out that the process of fermentation actually unlocks a far greater amount of nutrients. And that is so important in cases where, one, diets are maybe not as diverse as they should be. Fermentation really adds a lot, contributes a lot to general human health. And it's something that you find in seasonings, in foods, and it's just important. And so for me, one of the things that I aspire to is to learn more about different fermentation practices with different foods, and to understand how that makes ingredients and nutrients more bioavailable, and also create new ways of using and combining them. But importantly, how do we simplify that information and share it with a greater population of people, so that we're taking these things we're taking the complexity out of it and bringing it to people who can apply it at home and in their kitchens. And this way, we're kind of embedding these practices that can create a lasting, more sustainable approach to human health and to the health of the planet.
So well said. Thank you. Chef, do you want to comment?
The other thing is that in order to make sure that the knowledge we impact back, we need to go to speak to students at culinary schools and explain to them. Example, when you talk about preservative methods normally brings a lot of flavor in food. Example, when there's something like a sauerkraut, which is a cabbage, Germans like sauerkraut. It's good for your gut, it's good for your stomach, and then maybe you've got some problem in the stomach, you eat that, and then it could easily ease your stomach and make it easy. So when I'm saying we talk to students, in order to, the method and then the way we do things, they should understand they carry on the system, because now it's all about system that we've been doing. And lately we found that the old ways of doing things, they were the best. Through COVID, we learned to go back to basics. You find each and every household, everyone was cooking and everyone was planting. You'll be so shocked that through COVID, more than over 80% of families, they've decided to plant something in their gardens, of which it never happened before. And then now it's all about learning to eat good and healthy food. And sometimes you don't know. Example, there's what we call tepe. There's a kind of spinach. So in one family of spinach is tepe. Tepe is very good. There's a lot of iron out of there. There's a lot of vitamin, and you can also dry it or you eat it fresh. So preservative methods, we all come together and we learn of doing things in a separate way.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the educating culinary students. Chefs are so much at the forefront of creating awareness about these issues, and chefs can really, be the advocates that we need to teach all of us, not just culinary students, but all of us about better ways of eating. You're on mute, but I'd love you to comment a little bit more on how, you mentioned that you're at a culinary institute right now, and what the students are asking, and do you see more interest in the culinary and hospitality industries because of COVID?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and you, as you said, you find out they ask a lot of questions, and if you are not knowledgeable, if you don't do research like what you are doing presently, it's good for all of us because now look, COVID. Now we have virtuals. Whether we talk to people from Nigeria, example, my sister Oz here, I spoke to you, Daniela. Before it would be so difficult to do such things, and now it's all about we all learning. We all learning to do things separately. Shortly, I'll be calling Ozoz privately and talking to you about how to do things differently, how they do in Nigeria. And I'll show my knowledge in South Africa. And all together, and we impact our knowledge. We are more skillful. We are more knowledgeable in the how to do things.
So great. I love the idea of this interconnectedness and us all working together despite the challenges that we faced over the last year. Chef, I want to shift gears a little bit and have you talk about Chefs with Compassion and how that came about, and how you mobilized, and how you and your colleagues, really worked to mobilize so many chefs to feed people around South Africa.
Chef with Compassion, it was formed during COVID by some few, one of the few ladies, and then they involve chefs in between, like example, the likes of Chef Kupile, he's the one who invited me into the project when it started, and they say, Chef, there's a project, will you be interested to do it? And there was no events through COVID, and then it was hard lockdown in South Africa. There was no movement. So I had to apply, and I also applied for the certificate to serve. And here I was. I served Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. It was my soup day kitchen, whereby out of my kitchen, I just decided, you know what? I'm providing my skills. I'm providing all what I've got for nothing, just to help in the shop. The kids, when it comes to Tuesday, you find all these kids lining up, waiting for us to come. And then we made sure that we cooked good, healthy, and nutritious food. So, you don't just cook because it's people that live in the informal settlement, but we make sure that we cook food that is good. And Chef with Compassion is still there. They're still organizing it. They're next to the market in Johannesburg, and there's a lot of people who still there and still doing the good job that they've never stopped. So once in a while, I go and visit them and see them, and you know what? It's still happening.
Absolutely. The crisis continues, but thankfully groups like Chefs with Compassion are stepping in and making sure, again, that people who need to be nourished are getting the nutrients that they need. Thank you again so much for explaining all that. Ozoz, I want to turn to you. You mentioned how colonialism has really impacted diets and sort of respect, or maybe lack of respect for food cultures. And I'm wondering if you can talk about inherent racism and how colonialism have shaped cuisine. You're from Nigeria, of course, but now you're living in North America, and the inherent racism that is present on this continent, not just in the food system, but in our daily lives, has had a lot of impact. And how can we sort of combat that when we're talking about the food system?
So the issue with colonialism is linked to capitalism, and how that pushes in the agricultural sector, for instance, monocultures. So a capitalist world wants one crop, a monopoly, such that there is an industrial approach to production. And what that does is that it destroys and diminishes local, indigenous, smaller farming systems. And so, for instance, I'll take rice. West Africa is a continent that has been growing rice since the early history of man. And yet across West Africa, Asian rice, which is one of two cultivated varieties. There's African rice and there's Asian rice. Asian rice has overtaken the markets.
Mm-hmm.
And that has stunted the growth of African rice industries. I'm glad to see that over the last 10, 15 years, that is reversing. You're finding more varieties of African rice on the market. People are using more local ingredients, but it's a conscious, deliberate effort to address this imbalance. That's one. And the other thing is that the inherent racism is largely to do with misinformation. And so the media plays a huge role in addressing and correcting that balance.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the work that I do is to juxtapose cultures and cuisines and to show people similarities between, for instance, French cuisine and Nigerian cuisine, where French cuisine is typically lauded and applauded, and equivalent dishes in Nigerian and West African cuisine are derided and not respected, and yet they have very similar elements. It's also shooting down faulty perceptions, like, oh, the consumption of meat in Africa is causing the planetary issues. But when you look at the way and the approaches that West Africans consume meat, it is very different from the way North Americans consume meat.
Right.
One, in West Africa, there's a focus on using the whole animal, right? All parts, head to tail.
Sure.
Whereas people turn up their noses about eating offal in North America. The other thing is you'll already find traditional cuisines where people are eating a whole steak, right? What is typically a whole steak for one person in North America goes into a pot of stew that feeds several people. And so there's a lot of education. You kind of have to, I find myself constantly reframing for a North American audience who have faulty perceptions about West African food cultures, food traditions, and histories. And also really show, one of my goals is I want people to know that there's a history behind many of the ingredients that we see today. So the success of rice in historical South Carolina and the American South was largely due to West African culinary knowledge,
right,
not just physical labor. And so I need to bring that understanding into the space. And so the people aren't looking at discrete elements and making faulty judgments, and the people are able to make informed decisions or to even spark off their curiosity to want to know more. I think we're on that journey. We're nowhere near the end, but
sure,
forums like this allow me share my work, but also allow me share some of the thinking behind it. And in the end, it's really to create space and understanding and identity for individual cultures and cuisines that will vary across the globe. It'll vary across different climatic conditions, across different societal systems, but the idea is a cohesive and strengthened food systems that has global impact.
Absolutely. And I love that, you're creating that space for folks to talk about these things more. Chef, you want to comment?
No, yes. The other thing is introducing of good, healthy food as we talk about. Example, there's a lot of these franchises like McDonald's, KFC, and all those things. And they're pushing things in a big way because one thing what we realize about them, they've got a big buying power in terms of buying things in a cultural. So that example, Chef, I'm also a member of South African Chef Association. And the association has created a support group. So there's a WhatsApp group whereby it's a WhatsApp group, and then we talk about issues in the industry, how we can do things separate differently, and how we can share knowledgeable and share example. If there's a job somewhere, if there's someone who's selling things in an easy way, in an affordable way, so we compare all those things and we come together, knowing that the market has been inflicted. Example, there's in South Africa. Example, it's also a lot of exports that they're doing outside to take fruit from the fruit and vegetables out of our country to other countries, and you find that those countries, they get an A grade because they pay big money to get all those vegetables. Whereby they say system, it can be created for our country in making sure that we also get the same level of ingredients. So instead of them going outside, we're using those things. And after, we can also, example, Nigeria, they can order something from us. We can also order some rice from Nigeria, which is instead of going to coming together and making sure that we're promoting African products and African cuisine. And there are chefs that I know in South Africa who are quite very good, like Chef Siabulele Gobo, whereby he promote African cuisine. His food, like Chef Andile Somdaka, is owning a restaurant in Midrand, as a restaurant, whereby they promote indigenous South African cuisine. There's a lot of Chef Absa, they promote our food. So it's all about promote our own sustainability ingredients, making sure that we're going back to traditional ways of saying and eating things. Example, it will be nice. You come from Australia or Nigeria, you come in a hotel, in the Hyatt Hotel, in the 5-star hotel. When you come there, you find South African cuisine instead of finding, but it's another story. So it takes time. We talk to them, we show them that we need to start promoting our own, and doing our own things in our own way.
So great. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, it's what Ozoz said before about dispelling these misconceptions and finding ways to create that awareness. I want to go back to something Ozoz said about the misconceptions around meat. And, there's a perception that all meat is bad. But from my perspective, not all meat is created equal. And especially how people in West and South Africa, meat is more used as a condiment or a flavoring. And I'm wondering if you can both speak about, the use of offal, for example, that Ozoz mentioned. That's, often a great ingredient for chefs to use, Chef Thamae. So, how do we dispel these misconceptions about meat?
But is it me who should answer? I didn't hear that.
Do you want to go ahead?
I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that. Can you repeat?
How do we dispel these misconceptions about eating meat and making sure that people understand that not all meat is bad?
No, unfortunately, not all meat is bad. The other thing is the cooking methods. How do you prepare that kind of meat instead of there's a method that we're using in South Africa, which is braai, which is similar to the American way. They call it barbecue. So you barbecue your meat and using a flame and then open fire cooking. So at least there's a more healthy effect in terms of how they affect the taste and the quality of the meat. It's like, example, if you deep fry and braai is quite like a different way, grilling methods, like using proper methods of cooking. And then all kinds of meat, you can eat chicken, you can eat fish, not fish, you can eat lamb, you can eat beef, you can eat, and there's, for instance, when you eat goat, a lot of people don't know that how good and healthy goat it is. A lot of vitamins there, a lot of iron you get out of it. And then not all meats are bad, but you know what? I'm a meat lover myself, and I also cook a lot of vegetarian dishes. But it all depends the methods how you prepare such a dish.
Well, and it also relates to the production practices. What the meat that's being produced in West and South Africa, as Ozoz said, is very different than the factory farming methods that are used in many parts of the global north. So, this nose to tail cooking is, again, going back to this idea of preventing food waste. If we're using the whole animal, we can make a big impact on how, we're treating the planet in many ways.
I totally agree. And, for me, how do we dispel the myths? Education is a huge part. It is in creating spaces where voices from all parts of the world come together to talk about these ideas, to share them, and to understand. And whereas I often see in the media a lot of regurgitation of the same things as opposed to new perspectives. So that's one way. And the other thing is in really understanding the frameworks of cuisine. So Nigerian and West African cuisines are really plant forward. I've been creating a catalog of Nigerian greens, and I could identify 50 that I'm familiar with. 50 greens and herbs, leafy and herbs that I am personally familiar with. There are hundreds that I've not encountered. To have 50 greens in the markets, general markets, you're not searching for them, is an amazing thing. We also have lots of nuts, seeds, alternative proteins that lots of people aren't aware of. For instance, there's a tuber, there's a mushroom tuber. You would call it a truffle if it had flavor and if it had an aroma or fragrance. It doesn't, but it is very useful in Nigeria as a sort of protein. That's something that's been used throughout Nigerian history, but not many people outside of Nigeria or West Africa know about it. So there are so many ways that these cuisines are plant forward that I think make for great learning across the world. Approaches to making soups and stews and using this nuts, seeds, gels, barks as thickeners. And how do we explore these West African culinary traditions and techniques? How do we apply them to global North or Western style cuisine? There's room for growth. And it's not about cultural appropriation. It's really about exchange, about learning, about expanding the breadth of not just our existence, but our participation in really creating a unified table. And I know that there are many things that connect us, that in many ways we're similar, but I do also appreciate that we're different. That's what adds flavor and dimension. However, I support respecting of those differences and not privileging one over the other. The differences are great, and conflict sometimes is great, but the respect that should accompany them is the primary thing.
I love that. And I love the idea of a unified table. Chef, go ahead.
Yes.
Did you want to comment on what Ozoz?
No. Yes. So the other thing is all these things, like example, learning from each other. I like it when she said she made research and found all those 50 ingredients. So it shows when you get information, you take all these ingredients and you start introducing them to other chefs and say, guys, chefs and maybe cooks, house cooks and everything, and ingredients that they didn't know that are quite good and healthy for their bodies, and you start introducing them and you start talking more about them. So that's when people will start appreciating what you've got, natural ingredients that come straight from the garden. There's organic, there's no preservative method. So it's all about, as I said, she did Ozzy she did mention about education. It's all about we go and educate people about the good and the bad of using most of the ingredients as well.
Fantastic. I want to go back to an audience question by Peggy H. And she asked, how do you address the idea that food, that good food, that nutritious food is too expensive for the masses?
I think this is, growing up, we grew things at home. You take okra seeds, pepper seeds, corn, we grew everything. And for me, it's a rewiring almost of our approach to homes. I'm a huge advocate for growing things at home, but also this idea of creating community gardens in areas where people might not have large enough plots of land or the skill. when communities come together and take on collective responsibility to address some of these issues, even in communities that don't necessarily have high earning power, there's still approaches to creating a nutrient base through these gardens that can become forms of sustenance. And this is where education comes in. And it's not formal education, it's education outside of the classroom. It's finding local advocates who are able to go into these communities to speak the language, whatever that language is, and to share the why and the how, and to start from almost very elemental things, because even in one thing can grow in communities, at least one thing, a few things. And how do we create these spaces where people can create these gardens and also go in and create the education to their uses? And this is a good way to get the most nutrients out of this. And that we have a lot of work ahead of us, but it's not impossible.
That is great. That is great. Chef, the work that you do in South Africa, I mean, you've seen how these community gardens can really revitalize communities and bring health
Yes.
to people.
Yeah, community gardens have worked and they've changed the perception. Example, there's a perception that say eating healthy is expensive. I don't believe in that because, example, you find big corporate, big industrial, they've inflicted prices in terms of saying that planting things and they calling them organic, and using the name organic to inflict the price and making sure that those things are quite expensive. Whereby if you plant those things and you go to community gardens, if you can bring the system. When I was in primary school and everything, there was a system whereby we used to have gardens, whereby on Wednesday there's a garden day, whereby all of us will go to the garden to plant. And all those things that you're planting, the fruits and vegetables, will be used to feed poor communities around the area. So if we go to such systems whereby we learn and we encourage people to start planting things in their own garden, to go to community places and asking the government to help with the crops, example, because some of the people, they might not afford to get all those things to plant. So you say to them, okay, this is how you do it. We come together and we start planting, and we're making sure that food is available in the community, whereby there will be food security. There won't be anyone who's running out of food. Someone will plant, example, beans. Someone will plant carrots. Someone will plant cabbage and everything. And with all those things, we exchange. There's a system of exchanging. We exchange all what you've got. I don't have beans. I know I go to a certain someone who gave me beans. I'm also giving them cabbage or spinach, what we have. So at the end of the day, we promote this planet a day, and the planet stay and healthy. And then we know that all of us things work in a different way as well.
Great. Thank you so much. So before we wrap up, I want you to each think of a call to action that you would like eaters or legislators. Chef, you've mentioned, the idea of the government getting involved. Eaters, policymakers, government. What is your call to action for increasing awareness around healthy and sustainable diets?
The call of action is to, example, use social networks. It's one of the biggest tools that we've got lately. We go to social networks, we start talking about these things. We go to food associations, example, we go, as I mentioned, chef associations, we go to culinary schools, and we start to make noise about it. And then we go to newspapers whereby we say, guys, this is us and this is what we are planning to do to make sure that the community stay healthy. Because, example, after COVID, everyone now wants to eat healthy. Everyone now wants to live in a different way. Then you say, guys, this is how we're going to make sure that we plant food that heals, food that makes sure that our bodies get nutritious, and it's all about that as well.
Great. I love that. Planting food that heals. Ozoz?
I think that having a platform, a space online where indigenous ingredients are documented, their uses explained, recipes gathered, And that's really a tool for education. And even in poor communities, there's access to the internet, and just having that information and knowledge together in one place that really explores local food systems, but also producers in that food systems. A couple of years ago, um, a chef friend pulled a group of us together to form a community called Abori in Nigerian. The purpose of Abori is really to look at the food systems within Nigeria, but also to create a vendor marketplace where people can find locally produced ingredients and produce and products and have access. So the connectivity is important, the knowledge gathering and putting together in a place is important, and then just finding ways to share that in small bite-sized modules that then come together to create this, again, cohesive system where people understand identity, culinary traditions, health, and just like care for compassion, that chef for compassion, that idea of care is such an important one, and it's essential to our collective growth.
Absolutely. What a beautiful way to end this discussion, this idea of care and compassion and creating spaces for learning and accessing information. I want to thank you both so much for joining me today. It's been an incredible Earth Day. I encourage everyone to check out the double pyramid models at barillacfn.com and continue using the hashtag double pyramid to share their thoughts and discussions. And again, you can see previous discussions that we've had this week on foodtank.com. I want to thank all of the chefs and experts from around the globe who have joined us this week to share their thoughts on the importance of food culture and respecting and honoring Indigenous and traditional food knowledge. And a big thank you to the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition Foundation. Thank you both so much for joining me today. I've learned so much during this discussion and really appreciate you taking the time and spending your Earth Day with me. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danielle Nierenberg. Thanks again. Please stay safe and happy Earth Day to you all.